We're here at the Minnesota South District office today with Pastor Nader Alaraj, who's a missionary in Minnesota. Really glad to have you here, Pastor. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you so much.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? What was it like? When did you become a Christian? All of that. And I know that's going to be a great story because that's probably like 1,000 years ago.
Yes, my family and I are Palestinians. I was born in Kuwait after the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which my parents went through. So to find a stable livelihood, they ended up living in Kuwait, and that's where we were born. I was a traditional Christian who just went to church not that often and never took my faith seriously. I ended up going through the Gulf War with my family in 1991. I was still in school, and we had a very rough time, and that kind of impacted my spiritual life.
Were there Christians in Kuwait?
Very few. The majority are Muslim people, including the Kuwaitis. You will probably have 99.9% as Christian. Maybe people from overseas would be Christian, like Indians, Bangladesh, or Malaysians and other nationalities.
But 99% would be Muslim in Kuwait.
The vast majority are Muslims.
And the church, is that Orthodox church?
Yeah, the traditional churches over there are either the Greek Orthodox Church or the Roman Catholic Church.
Okay, so you were in Kuwait and you were in high school, and you had to leave because of the war. Yes,
in the middle of school, Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, and it was rough because it dismantled the Kuwaiti government. People's livelihood was cut short, and people had to scramble to either stay or leave. The Iraqis were taking control of Kuwait, and things were disorderly.
That was the second time that your family had to leave a country.
Pretty much.
Because they were in Palestine.
Yeah.
What happened there? Your dad have a farm, or what did he do?
Yeah, my parents are, very simple people who were farmers. Their parents were farmers. And Palestine was under the British mandate, and it was a simple way of life in the Palestinian areas. And in 1948, Israel became a state, and a lot of Palestinians lost their homes, except in the West Bank and Gaza.
What do you mean lost their homes?
Basically, the Israelis took over. The Israelis took over. They had weapons. They had United Nations resolution that divided the land, and everybody scrambled to survive. There were Jewish people who lived in those areas, but they were a minority, and now they're a majority with a lot of militants involved to kick all the Palestinians out. So the Palestinians went up north to Lebanon, went down south to Gaza, West Bank, Jordan, Egypt, and now the Israelis, who were never there, became a state.
What happened to the house and the farm that your dad had?
Basically, my dad was in the West Bank at that point. It was my father-in-law who was in Java, and his dad took him when he was only 40 days old and had to run away for his life to the West Bank in Ramallah. So he had to, walk all the way from Java to Ramallah, leave his house behind him. He still had the keys, but he cannot do anything about it.
How long a distance was that?
It was probably 60 kilometers, but in those days, cars were rare, and it's a rough drive. You probably had to go, with a bunch of people in a bus, or transportation wasn't that easy. So it took quite some time to travel and run away for your life, and you had to do it anyway. So you go to a new city, a new place, and wonder what's going to happen to your possessions and properties.
How long had your family had that farm?
My parents have, and they still maintain it, but I mean, they abandoned living there because you can't live there. And they had it for a long time. Actually, the olive trees are as old as 2,000 years. They can live that long.
Was your family in Palestine that long?
Yeah, we can at least trace 3 generations back. We're talking about maybe 1850. We would know that person's name at least. And my dad's grandmother was under the Ottoman Empire, and she had her birth certificate in that language, the Turkish language, the Ottoman language, because the British were not there yet. And she was born, I think, in 1895 or something like that. So it was very interesting to still see that birth certificate and realize how many political systems change and people are the same. They just have to go by whatever is taking over.
So your family is forced out of Palestine and then forced out of Kuwait. And where did you go after Kuwait?
After Kuwait, my parents had a house in Jordan. We used to go there for vacations in the summertime. And now it became our residence because you no longer can live in Palestine because the Israelis are there. You no longer can be in Kuwait because you cannot have a visa to stay there. So Jordan became ultimately the place for a lot of Palestinians that were either kicked out of Palestine or continued to maintain that place as their residence after the creation of Israel. But those Palestinians were scattered. Some of them were Lebanon, some of them were in Iraq, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, which was my family, Saudi Arabia. Those remained there, but those that lived in Kuwait because of the Gulf War had to leave because Iraq invaded Kuwait, and unfortunately the Palestinian leadership supported Iraq, and so they were not favored to remain there, and they were again kicked out.
Palestinians were kicked out and had to go to Jordan.
The Jordanians and the Palestinians. So that's the second diaspora for my parents, and now they are continuing to live in Jordan. They're much older now, but it's a very tough life.
How old were you when you had to leave and go to Jordan?
I was 15.
15?
Yeah.
So did you go to school then in Jordan?
Yeah, I went to school because of the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. I lost 1 year of school because of that. So I graduated when I was 19 in Jordan. I went to college there for about a year and a half, and then my immigration process concluded, and I became a permanent resident of the United States, and I first came in 1996 to Cincinnati, Ohio.
To Cincinnati? Why Cincinnati?
It was the only college that gave me an admission. I kind of applied late, and every college, has a deadline. And so I basically applied for that approximately in March or April, and by then it's too late to enroll in a fall semester. So Cincinnati had a quarterly system. So they were giving me a chance to probably get involved in the winter.
So your parents stayed back in Jordan, and you came to the United States as a student. What were you studying?
I studied medical technology. I was dreaming of becoming, a scientist and trying to find out a solution for cancer or be part of a research team that allowed people to find a cure. For cancer. I just had a big heart to serve people and to love people, and one way I thought would please God is to find a solution for cancer that would heal a lot of people.
Now, what happened?
Eventually, I came to Cincinnati, and I didn't realize that the culture shock was about to happen. Not the same food, not the same language, not the same habits, not the same, customs. Everything is different about the West from the Middle East. It's a totally different culture. Basically, I had to survive with my English. I think I had a decent English, but people will ask me questions and I wouldn't understand them in the beginning when I first started, which is okay. And then I took it personal and improved myself by God's grace, which I didn't know at that time. Ultimately, within 1 year, I had multiple situations that took place that made me really start looking and seeking God. I had somebody at work that didn't like me, and they started accusing me of false things and Unfortunately, management listened to them, and I was terminated from that position.
Did you experience discrimination during that time?
It wasn't probably a declared, discrimination. It was, I would say, implicit. And eventually, when you're struggling with your English and embracing a new culture, if there isn't a loving person that understands that situation, you're going to be ridiculed and laughed at. That kind of took place, but not all the time. But it hurts, but then it was part of my growing process. And I think it was one of the things that God pressed on me to start watching and looking for Him. I started questioning why I came to the United States, why am I doing here, on top of all these other matters. So when you put them all together, for the first time in my life, I knelt on my knees and I sought God sincerely from my heart. It was a completely personal and intimate moment when I bowed on my knees, and I remember those words that I said, Lord, I do know that you're the truth, and I'm going through a lot of hard time in my life, but I do know that you're the truth and you are loving, and I fully want to follow you on your steps. It wasn't, a sinner's prayer. It wasn't, the classical prayer or being in church kind of way. I was in my very cold efficiency down in a basement in Cincinnati, Ohio in January of 1998 when I uttered that prayer. And on my knees in the cold, God warmed that room with His presence for the first time in my life. And that's how I confessed my faith.
Had you been a member of a church at that point?
I wasn't. But I think my upbringing left some seeds that God watered through situations and hardships, and maybe good times too. He still maintains a good time for you, but He also wants to pressure you to start looking at Him. That's how sometimes we have to understand why God allows tough times that we go through. Is sometimes this is the only way you're going to look at Him.
So you were down on your knees and you prayed and you looked to the Lord, and what happened then?
I completely felt different. I started being joyful in a sensual way. I started being appreciative about life, not looking at things in the same scope. My perspective changed. I started seeking God more and more, day after day. I just loved grabbing the Bible. I loved reading more about who Jesus was, because something happened to me. I cannot explain it. It's a spiritual experience. And I found about it in John 14, where Jesus said, I don't leave you alone. I will send you the Holy Spirit. He will remain with you and live within you. And I cried when I read that statement because I couldn't explain it better than that. And Jesus said that 2,000 years ago. And I'm from the very same land, was supposedly Christian by birth, but I didn't know that. You have to know God.
And
you have to
How old were
experience.
you then?
I was just turned 21 or 22, just new in the United States, and almost alone too, because you're still trying to create relationships, befriend people, but you also want to hang out with the right crowd, because there's a lot of negative influence too, and peer pressure to do the wrong things. There's a lot of nightclubs on the Ohio River between Kentucky and Cincinnati, there on the border there. Lots of friends would want to take me there, but God in His mighty ways sees those that seek Him, and He's ready knocking on the door. And when I said, please, I believe in you, I trust in you, it was my confession experience. And He just, like the prodigal son, He just will embrace you. He just wants to hear it from you. You are responsible for yourself. You have to say, Lord, I want you in my life.
And then what happened?
And basically, my goals in life started to change. Yes, I wanted to cure people for cancer, but maybe there's something more that God wants me to do. I did maintain my academic pursuit of a degree. I wanted to graduate, whether in pharmacy or medicine or something else. I ended up graduating as a medical technologist. I worked in the laboratory. I saw patients. I drew blood. I analyzed samples. I communicated with physicians. I still felt that I had a purpose in providing health care and healing for people that need it. It was also a witnessing experience, because when you interact with patients, although you don't have much time, and policy would probably disallow you from sharing your faith with somebody else, but I was genuine about it. You know, I will listen to God's law before man's law and be genuine about sharing my experience with people. And a lot of people listened. A lot of people wanted me to pray for them. And it was a wonderful way to share your faith about God and continue to grow in grace and faith. We, in 2010 almost, the first Arabic Christian fellowship in Omaha, Nebraska started with a planting pastor who came from Wichita, Texas. He's with the Lord now, but he came and we ended up, he wanted me to lead a small group of a Bible study for Arabic-speaking Christians.
You were in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm fast forwarding here. I spent 2 years in Cincinnati,
Okay.
and then I ended up wanting to be involved in medical technology,
Right.
and that's when Cincinnati's doors were shut. The pharmacy college was shut. The medicine college was shut.
Okay.
And I ended up applying to Omaha's University, UNO, and in Nebraska. And my previous two brothers graduated from Lincoln, Nebraska.
Oh.
So that's why I wanted to be in Nebraska. Maybe I would know some people that they would know. And somehow I got admitted to UNO. Ended up going there, finishing my classes, and then going to the University of Nebraska Medical Center. And I also got admitted there for the medical technology program in 2000, in year 2000. And in 2000, in the summer of 2000, I started that one-year program, and I graduated in 2001 in medical technology.
And were you involved in a congregation at that point?
At that
Christian
point,
church?
I was trying to find a church to embrace. I was raised Catholic, and I went to a Catholic church. The Mass didn't fulfill me 100%, and that's just my personal experience. And I tried to look for many churches right and left. I went to all kinds. I went to Lutheran, I went to Presbyterian. I'm not looking for a denomination. I was just looking to see where the living God is and be nourished that way. I continued to visit with multiple churches until in 2010, fast forwarding about several years, I started my medical technology career. I was busy with that. I attended multiple congregations. Until it was 2009 actually, when the Arabic Christian Fellowship started, and we started worshiping, singing in Arabic. So yeah, we started the Arabic Fellowship because there were some Arabic-speaking Christians in Omaha, Nebraska, who needed to worship in their native tongue, especially some of the older folks.
And how did that start?
That started with I subscribed to a magazine called Voice of Preaching the Gospel, which is the brothers started it in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And they decided, the pastoral leadership team, to have a Midwestern state conference annually around Labor Day, to have all the Christians from Nebraska, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, the Dakotas.
Arabic Christians.
The Arabic Christians who don't live on the coastal areas, because those are a lot. In New York, Virginia, California, Texas, Florida. There's a lot of them that are there.
Yeah.
But the Midwestern ones don't have a conference in the Midwestern states. And so they extended one invitation in 2009 saying, we're going to embark upon having a first conference for Arabic speakers to come together. Come revive, rejuvenate in the Lord, relax, let's find what we can do as Christians. There was about 80 people, the first conference, a few pastors from several states in Kansas, in Colorado, and some other states, and Missouri, I think. So they came, they organized the conference together, and they put it together, and you just started meeting a lot of people you didn't know were close to you.
And we're Christian.
Yeah,
this
they
was
were.
in Norfolk, Nebraska.
Norfolk?
Mm-hmm.
What's in
This was
Norfolk?
where, in Nebraska?
No, the
Oh,
conference, the first conference started in Hays, Kansas,
Hays, Kansas.
and
okay.
then they went to Wichita, Kansas.
And then, okay.
That was more central point to the people who lived in Oklahoma, Colorado, Missouri, like Kansas City,
Okay.
Omaha, Lincoln. It was more of a central location for
Wichita.
everybody. So yeah, you drive about 5, 6, 7 hours and you get there in Wichita.
Now, how often did they meet?
We met once every year on the Labor Day weekend.
Okay.
So I always took off several days from work around that time. I really cherished that moment to
And
go
you still
there.
weren't a member of a church, though?
Not a fully committed member at a church. I was just scrambling around between multiple churches. I ended up, getting to know this pastor who was planting Arabic-speaking churches. He started in, I believe, in New Jersey. Then he went to Dallas, started one there, and then he went up north to Wichita, Kansas. And now he was discussing with me establishing a Bible study group and hopefully a church, an Arabic-speaking one, in Omaha, Nebraska.
In Omaha, okay.
He was a jealous pastor to fulfill God's will, seeing lots of mosques, a lot of Arabic-speaking Muslims having mosques, Islamic centers, and it's a metro area. Wichita has about 450,000 people. Omaha had more than that, and he just wants to see Christian people being there, and maybe even having outreach to Muslims who are interested in hearing about the gospel. And that's what happened. We discussed it together. We started calling the people we know and praying over having all the Arabic-speaking Christians come together in Omaha, Nebraska. And we met sometime, I believe, in October of 2009. We had about 20 people from different backgrounds: Egyptians, Iraqis, Sudanese. There's a big Sudanese population in Omaha, and Palestinians, Jordanians, etc., to come together and worship the Lord in Arabic. And the pastor even brought hymnal books in Arabic so we can sing together. He had amplifiers and speakers so that we can have a small church, not an official one yet. To fast forward, I started leading that group for Bible study because the pastor continued to live in Wichita, and it's a 5.5-hour drive, and he drove almost every week. He was ill, and he still drove all the way and sacrificed his time and health to start and plant something for the Lord. And this fellowship is continuing and thriving, and it was blessed with a pastor who came from Egypt in 2012, 3 years later, and started leading the meeting. And I was leading, with worship and people. Sometimes you need a sort of an elder who comes and assists the pastor in multiple ways. So we started losing some members and adding more members. Things kind of shuffle. The Lord uses this as a way to keep the ones that He wants to keep. And it's a struggle because we're a total of 15 people, and when one person leaves, it accounts for a lot. But then one person leaves, another two come. And so it was through that fellowship that the pastor there and I started also considering doing outreach. There's a Sunni Islamic Center in Omaha. There's a Shiite Islamic Center, and it's fully funded by imams in the Middle East by millions and millions of dollars to establish. Also, Lincoln has quite a very diverse population. Yazidis from Iraq. They're not Christian, they're not Muslim, they're kind of in between. They have their own faith, and they're open to the gospel. A lot of people are open, especially in the West. They dare to ask questions without being afraid to be persecuted.
Because they're here in the United
They're
States.
in the United States, and they can meet elsewhere without somebody taking notice of them and ask their questions. And the outcome of this, having this fellowship and a few visits to Lincoln, was the baptism of a Muslim family that I shall leave unnamed for their safety. They believed, confessed their faith, and it was a quick fruit for the fellowship, as if people were waiting for this fellowship to be. Another person from Africa was away from God in drugs, doesn't have a dad, so he's struggling. His life was turned around, he believes right now, and he's serving in one of the Lutheran churches through the pastor that was down there. Another Muslim who was a co-worker at work ended up, he stopped trusting in the Allah of the Quran, and he started believing in Jesus as God.
Now, you can't share their names. There's danger here, even in the United States.
We would rather, yes, to keep them anonymous, because the world is small.
Still have family back home.
Still have family back home, and they can travel easily to the United States, and we better just protect them, because some of the people back home will not accept that, and it's a shame to keep them alive, so they will immediately start thinking of killing them or getting rid of them one way or another.
It's a shame to the relatives back home that are Muslim.
Yes.
And so they feel a need to take the life of that.
Yes, yes, and there was one passage by the Prophet of Islam that mentions that anybody who changes his religion, you must kill him. I don't know if it was contextual for that period of time or it still applies, but what we see is that it still applies.
A lot of people still believe it.
Yeah.
So how did you get involved with the Mid-South District of the Lutheran Church?
Yeah, ultimately God saw what we were doing in this fellowship. There's an organization called PABLO, P-O-B-L-O.
People of the Book Lutheran Outreach. People
of the Book Lutheran Outreach, and people of the Book, according to the Quran, are Christians and Jews. And so it's targeting people of such backgrounds, to especially our Muslim brothers and sisters. We love them. We just want to share the good news with them. And we want to converse, we want to talk to them.
So how did you get involved with Pablo?
Yeah, eventually this pastor for the fellowship ended up getting involved in doing outreach, and he connected me with Pablo, who was looking around to recruit people to come to the Minneapolis area. There was already a Rochester branch that opened, I think, since 2013 or
Rochester, Minnesota.
Rochester, Minnesota. And the Friendship Centers and Pablo's was expanding, and it became popular. And now they're considering the Twin Cities, because the Twin Cities is much bigger, and it's a hub for a lot of immigrants and internationals and refugees. And it's one of the major cities that contract with the federal government to bring people here and house them and provide service for them. There's a lot of Hmong population here, I think close to 90,000. There's, in my estimate, there's about 120,000 Somalis. Lots of people, Hispanics, close to 250,000. You have people from Russia, Ukraine, about 50,000. There's a lot of people, and I don't think many churches are reaching out to them.
This is in St. Paul, Minneapolis.
Yes. It's a 3 million.
Cities.
It's a 3 million population, and according to one of the ministries that I collaborate with, they would say about 1/3 of Minneapolis and St. Paul's population are immigrants.
Other than white English-speaking people.
First and second generation immigrants, whether they're Russian, Scandinavian, Africans, Asians, and 90% of them don't know about the gospel.
What a mission field that God's led you to. What happened? What are you doing now? How are you reaching that field?
It's a great opportunity to be involved with this ministry that first and foremost embrace and love others in a much hospitable and safe environment. That's the Middle Eastern culture. That's, let's say, even the Eastern culture. Notice all these refugees that I quoted are from the East. Russians, Asians, Hmong, Chinese, Vietnamese, Middle Eastern, Somalis, all Eastern cultures, and they have a lot of common grounds in their cultures. Even the Hispanics have more common cultural similarities to the Eastern culture than the Western culture. And they are all family oriented. They're hospitable. They won't let you go before you drink a cup of tea or coffee and maybe even have lunch or even stay over for the night. Just like the biblical culture almost. And you bring it with you. You're not going to get rid of it. You will try to assimilate with the second generation into the American culture, but you will still carry with you a lot of the community-based environment instead of the Western is more individual-based.
So these are the people that you were witnessing to.
These people you interact with because, oh, where are you from? I mean, you just look at them and talk with them. Sometimes Georgette and I, my wife, we speak Arabic, and people overhear us, and then they wonder where we're from, and that's how you start a conversation. Sometimes it takes place in a Middle Eastern restaurant. That's how we met some people. We kind of look familiar to them, and we speak Arabic sometimes, combined with English, and then they start questioning who we are, where we come from, and that's how you develop relationships. Relationships are the core of how you get to know people.
So you've created this safe place for people to come, people from the East to come, and especially people who speak Arabic, to ask questions and find answers in the Bible and in Jesus.
Yeah, the way we actually house them is we communicate with interested LCMS churches.
Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
Yes, Lutheran churches who are willing to use their facilities smartly. Meaning, at the times you're not using it for a Bible study or women gathering to sew or knit, why don't you give us the space for free, and we will utilize the tables, the chairs, the blackboards to teach people English, to teach people how to acquire their citizenship, start offering the serious classes, I call them, the ESL and the citizenship. And then let's also have fun. Let's have other nice, light-hearted classes such as sewing and knitting, especially if the women are staying at home and the men are earning the bread outside.
Chance to socialize.
Why don't you come? We'll teach you how to sew, how to knit, how to cook, or maybe if you're computer illiterate, we'll show you how to use the computer, the internet.
And you have one site that does this?
Currently, since we've been here for a year and a half, we have just started the second one. We started one in Bloomington, and now we're starting one in Burnsville.
And how many do you think you can start?
I don't know. I think the sky is the limit, but we better be able to reach out first. So we'll start slow so that we can know who people are, because this is personal too. If you branch out pretty quickly, you need somebody to coordinate that.
You're emphasizing relationships.
You have to just focus on families, because people are sick, people are homesick, people are bored, people are feeling lonely. People need somebody to pray with them. People have questions about God, and these may require you to just focus on a couple of families and continue to visit with them or invite them over.
Nader, what's your hope and dream that this could become eventually in the next 10 to 20 years? What would this look like?
The Church of Jesus Christ, regardless of its denomination, has the responsibility, according to Matthew 28, to go. That's what Jesus said. Go. It's a small world, but it has a lot of meanings. And you go out there, you disciple people, you baptize people, you love people, you appreciate them for who they are. You don't force anything upon them. You just embrace them as they are. The church in every corner in every city has a responsibility being in that corner. If that church does not reflect the community it lives within, it has no reason to be there.
So your dream is that, at least in the St. Paul, Minneapolis area, that every congregation would provide space and openness and a willingness to reach people of different culture and ethnic backgrounds, particularly if they're immigrants or refugees.
Absolutely, and this is commanded by God in the Bible. We have to be responsive, we have to be responsible, and we must act according to the Great Commission. Otherwise, what is Christian about us? It's not about holding a service and only tending for those that are within the service. It is our job to love and support the brothers and the sisters within the congregation, so the congregation is stronger day after day, week after week. But what about those that don't know about Him, who love them? God has commanded us to reach out to those people. And being a Palestinian, coming all the way from close to Jerusalem all the way to Minneapolis, we're fulfilling what Jesus said: go to Jerusalem, go to Samaria, go to Judea, and Minneapolis, in that context, is the end of the earth. So,
well, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us, Nader.
My pleasure.
We pray God's richest blessings on your ministry.